Ferrari just found something they were never supposed to see. Not data, not simulations, actual footage. And what appears in those images could expose how Mercedes is gaining up to 40 extra horsepower while still passing every FIA inspection as completely legal. This isn't just an advantage. This is race-winning performance hidden in plain sight. Because if this footage is real, then Mercedes isn't just faster. They're operating under a completely different set of conditions. And here's the part that changes everything. The FIA already checked the engine multiple times and still declared it legal. So, how do you stop something that breaks the spirit of the rules without breaking the rules themselves? Ferrari believes they've found the answer. And if they're right, then what we've seen so far this season was never a fair fight. Subscribe now, because what this footage reveals only gets worse. Ferrari didn't go looking for footage. That's what makes this so dangerous. Because in Formula One, teams don't rely on cameras to find performance. They rely on numbers, telemetry, simulations, cold, precise data. But this time, data wasn't enough, because what they were seeing on track didn't fully match what the numbers were telling them. And that's always the first warning sign. Something doesn't add up. Something is happening. That shouldn't be possible. Mercedes wasn't just fast. They were consistently pulling away in phases where no clear advantage should exist. Mid-straight acceleration, energy deployment zones, moments where every team should look almost identical. But they didn't. And Ferrari noticed. At first, they questioned their own models. Maybe they were missing something. Maybe their simulations were wrong. Maybe Mercedes had simply done a better job. But then the pattern repeated. Again, and again, and again. And that's when doubt turns into investigation. Because consistency like that is never accidental. So Ferrari changed approach. They stopped asking how fast Mercedes was, and started asking when they were fast. That shift sounds small, but it changes everything. Because instead of looking at lap times, they started breaking down moments, frames, tiny windows of performance where differences become visible. And that's when video entered the equation. Not as proof, at least not at first, but as a tool. A way to observe what data couldn't fully explain. High-speed cameras, thermal imaging, detailed race replays. Everything slowed down, everything analyzed. And in those slowed down moments, something appeared. Not obvious, not dramatic, but consistent. Under certain conditions, the Mercedes car behaved differently. Not just faster, sharper, more responsive, as if the power delivery wasn't fixed, as if it adapted. And that's where the connection started to form. Because Ferrari already suspected something about the engine. Thermal behavior, expansion, a system that changes with temperature. But now, they were seeing it, not in numbers, in motion. And this is where things become very uncomfortable, because what the footage suggests is that the engine transitions between two states, a controlled state and a performance state. At lower temperatures, everything looks normal, predictable, within expected limits. But as heat builds, as the race intensifies, there's a moment, a subtle shift, where the car gains something extra. Not suddenly, not aggressively, but enough to change outcomes, enough to create a gap. And here's why that matters. Because that exact behavior aligns with the compression theory. An engine that passes inspection when cold, but delivers more when hot. And if both things are true, then Ferrari isn't chasing a theory anymore. They're watching it happen. That's what turns suspicion into tension. Because once you can see it, you start asking a different kind of question. Not, is this happening? But, how long has this been happening? And that's where the pressure begins to build. Not publicly, not in headlines, but inside meetings, inside strategy rooms, inside decisions that now carry much more weight. Because if Ferrari pushes this further, if they escalate, if they force the FIA to act, this doesn't just affect one race. It affects everything that's already happened. And Mercedes knows that, which is why their response hasn't changed. Calm, precise, controlled. We are within the rules. And again, technically they are. But what Ferrari now believes is that the rules are no longer the full picture. Because the real performance isn't happening where the FIA is looking. It's happening where no one was looking. Until now. But here's where everything starts to spiral out of control. Because once Ferrari believed the footage confirmed their suspicions, they stopped treating this as a technical curiosity and started treating it as a competitive threat. A serious one. The kind that forces decisions no team wants to make. Because now, this isn't just about understanding Mercedes. It's about what to do next. Do you stay quiet and try to replicate it? Or do you expose it and risk triggering something much bigger? That's the dilemma Ferrari is facing right now. And it's not a simple one, because going public doesn't just hurt Mercedes. It destabilizes the entire championship. Think about it. If Ferrari pushes this to the FIA with enough pressure, and the FIA is forced to react, then suddenly, every result from the first races comes under scrutiny. Not officially, but mentally, strategically, psychologically. And that changes how teams race, how drivers defend, how engineers develop. Because now there's doubt. And doubt in Formula One is dangerous. But here's the deeper problem. Ferrari knows something most people don't. Even if the FIA acts, even if they change the measurement process, even if they close the loophole, that doesn't remove the advantage immediately. Because whatever Mercedes built was designed months in advance, integrated, optimized, perfected. You don't just switch that off overnight. And that's what makes this situation so frustrating. Because Ferrari could be right and still lose time, still lose points, still lose races, all while knowing exactly why. And that's where the tension becomes personal. Because this isn't just engineering anymore. It's competition at the highest level, where every tenth matters, where every decision defines a season. And Ferrari now feels like they're racing against something they didn't prepare for, something they didn't see coming, something that doesn't behave like a normal rival. And inside Mercedes, they understand this perfectly. That's why there's no panic, no visible reaction, no urgency in their public tone. Because from their perspective, they've done nothing wrong. They followed the rules. Exactly. They found a gap, and they used it. That's Formula One. But here's what makes this even more intense. They also know the clock is ticking. Because June is coming, and with it, a completely different way of measuring reality. No more cold checks. No more controlled environments. Only real conditions. Race conditions. The same conditions where Ferrari believes the engine reveals its true behavior. And that moment is going to expose everything. Because if Mercedes loses even a fraction of performance, even a small drop, it confirms the entire theory. It validates the footage. It proves that what Ferrari saw was real. But if nothing changes, if Mercedes remains just as dominant, then this goes far beyond a single trick. Because that would mean one of two things. Either the advantage was never fully understood, or Mercedes has already moved beyond it, improved it, replaced it, evolved it into something even harder to detect. And that possibility is what's really keeping Ferrari awake right now. Because chasing something you can't see is difficult. But chasing something you thought you understood, and then realizing you didn't, that's worse. Much worse. And this is why the next races matter more than ever. Not just for points, not just for standings, but for answers. Because every lap, every sector, every tiny change in performance is now being watched differently, analyzed differently, questioned differently. The entire grid is looking at Mercedes, not just as the fastest team, but as the reference, the unknown, the benchmark that might not even be fully visible yet. And that leads to one final uncomfortable thought. If Ferrari needed footage to understand what was happening, what else is still hidden that nobody has seen yet? And now we reach the point where everything connects. Because up to this moment, Ferrari has been reacting, analyzing, observing, trying to understand what Mercedes built. But what happens when understanding is no longer enough? That's when Formula One changes. Because there's a moment in every technical battle where it stops being about catching up and starts being about survival. And Ferrari is getting dangerously close to that point. Because the more they investigate, the more this stops looking like a single discovery and starts looking like a gap in philosophy, a completely different way of designing performance. Not chasing maximum output at all times, but controlling when that output appears. And that idea is much bigger than one engine. Because if you can decide when your car becomes faster, you don't just gain speed, you control the race. Think about that for a second. Not just being quicker overall, but being quicker exactly when it matters most. On corner exit, on long straights, on critical overtakes. That's not just performance, that's precision dominance. And this is what Ferrari is now starting to fear. Because the footage doesn't just suggest extra power, it suggests timing, control, a system that knows when to deliver more and when to stay within limits. And if that's true, then Mercedes isn't just ahead. They're operating on a level the others haven't even reached yet. But here's where things become even more intense. Because inside the paddock, this kind of situation spreads fast. Not publicly, not through statements, but through whispers. Engineers talk, teams observe, patterns get shared, and suddenly what Ferrari saw is no longer just Ferrari's concern. It becomes everyone's concern. Because if one team has found a way to bend performance without breaking legality, every team has to respond. Not next season, now. And that creates pressure. Massive pressure. Because developing something like this isn't simple. It's not a new wing. It's not a setup change. It's deep engineering. Materials, thermal behavior, integration between systems. The kind of development that takes months, sometimes years. And here's the reality no team wants to admit. Even if they understand it today, they can't replicate it tomorrow. Which means Mercedes holds the advantage. Not just in performance, but in time. And time is the most valuable currency in Formula One. But everything still leads to that same moment. June. Because that's when theory meets reality. That's when the FIA removes the uncertainty and forces every engine to reveal its true behavior. Under heat, under pressure, under the exact conditions where Ferrari believes everything changes. And when that happens, there will be no more interpretation, no more debate, just performance. Pure, visible, undeniable performance. And that's what makes this moment so critical. Because it won't just show whether Mercedes was right or whether Ferrari was right. It will show something much more important. How much of Mercedes' dominance was built on something others couldn't see? And how much remains even after that is taken away? Because if the gap closes, the story ends one way. A clever loophole, a temporary advantage, a solved mystery. But if the gap stays the same, or worse grows, then everything we've talked about so far becomes just the surface. And that leads to a final realization. One that nobody in Formula One is comfortable saying out loud. Maybe the footage didn't reveal the secret. Maybe it only revealed that there is one. And if that's true, then Ferrari hasn't exposed Mercedes. They've only just started chasing them.